Hey, everybody. This is Steve Knight. I am the Director of Marketing and Sales for Chalice Press, and I'm excited to be here with you today. Um, we love doing these live stream conversations to introduce you to our authors and to give you more information and value from the books that we are publishing. So I'm really excited to be here today with Clay Stauffer, who is live from Nashville, Tennessee. And how are you doing today, Clay?
I'm doing great, Steve. And it's Clay Stauffer. Everybody likes to say Stauffer, but it's Clay Stauffer. But I've also been called a lot worse. So I'll take either one.
All right, we might have to get into that a little bit. Yes, Clay Stauffer. Thank you for that correction.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've teased everyone with this title, "How to Preach About Politics Without Getting Fired." So hopefully we got a few folks who are excited and interested in finding about that. Let me say this on YouTube, folks who are watching, in the comments, please, we invite your questions, we invite your comments. I'll be monitoring that, pulling that over into the conversation here with Clay. And so as we go along for the next hour, please participate, engage, let us know what you would like to ask Clay, what you'd like to find out more about. Yeah, so we invite that. We invite you to tweet, Facebook, hashtag Preaching Politics, which is the title of Clay's new book. And we're just excited to be here, and I'm excited to get into this and have this conversation with you, Clay. So should we? How does this sound? Should we do this?
Sounds great, and I will answer every question you ask me to the best of my ability, and share whatever comes to mind.
Fantastic. Well, for folks who aren't already familiar with you, Clay, tell us a little bit about who you are, your background. I think you've got an interesting resume, a ministry experience. Tell us a little bit about who you are and where you're coming from.
Yeah, I'm the senior pastor at Woodmont Christian Church, but I come from a long line of disciples preachers. I'm actually a fourth generation Disciples of Christ minister. My great-grandfather was in Atlanta, First Christian Church of Atlanta. My grandfather literally started and built First Christian Church of Wilton Manors, where my uncle is now the minister. And then my father, Roy Stauffer, was in Memphis for 35 years as a senior pastor at Lindenwood Christian Church. And he's now on our staff here at Woodmont. He does adult education, pastoral care, small groups. But so I was born and raised in Memphis, and grew up there. Went to TCU for undergrad, went to Princeton Seminary, and then just last year I finished my doctorate, my DMin, at Sewanee at the School of Theology, and this was the focus of my research at Sewanee.
Wow, very cool. Well, I have to ask, what is it like being a pastor's kid and now being the senior minister and having your dad on staff? What's that like?
Being your dad's boss is very interesting. The truth is, my dad and I have always worked well together. I was when I was at Princeton, I worked on the staff of the Riverside Church in New York. So with Jim Forbes, and I was the college young adult minister up there for a couple of years, and then I went back to Memphis in 2005, and I worked on my dad's staff for 2 years. So he was my boss, and then I got called to Woodmont in 2007, and I was 27 years old, and then he later came to Nashville when he left Lindenwood, and so it's a different dynamic, but we work really well together. We challenge each other, we balance each other out, and we're also really fortunate to have a great staff here in Nashville, so that we get to work with all of them as well. So.
That's great. Well, we're here to talk about preaching, and particularly this new book, Preaching Politics. You mentioned a minute ago that a good bit of this was your research and study when you're doing your DMin. So that's kind of the impetus for this project goes back to that, it sounds like.
Yeah, there's three subjects, Steve, that they say you should never bring up in polite company, and it's religion, politics, and money. Excuse me. And so I just wrote a book about all three. I believe that the reason that there's such emotion when it comes to these topics is because people care about them. People care about their faith. They care about their spiritual life. Clearly, people care about politics, regardless of where they fall politically. And then money is a universal topic that we all have to deal with. And what I've found is that money is a stressful topic, whether you're rich or poor or somewhere in between. So I believe that faith and politics intersect, and the question is how do we approach it? How do we understand it? And so I've been working on this topic for the last 2 or 3 years, 3 or 4 years. And it's really interesting that the book released this month, and Chalice may have had some wisdom there, but it's a very timely topic, just given what we see in our current political dialogue.
Yeah. The book officially came out, available everywhere on Super Tuesday, which you'd have to be kind of living under a rock probably to not be bombarded with news, politics in the news right now with the presidential election going on. So yeah, there was a little method to that madness for sure. Tell us a little bit more about the book and kind of what folks can expect when they're reading it. You said that there's three topics, three big taboo topics that you're talking about in this book: money, politics, and religion, bringing all those things together. So
I started out with a fascination with what is it that makes somebody liberal, what is it that makes somebody conservative. And I have actually found the research of Jonathan Haidt. I don't know how many of you have heard of Jonathan Haidt, but he was at the University of Virginia. He's now up at NYU at the School of Business up there. But he wrote a book called The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Disagree Over Politics and Religion. And Haidt has done as good of a job as any at trying to analyze the question, what is it that makes somebody liberal? What is it that makes somebody conservative? Is it their family? Is it their income? Is it just the culture in which they live? And so what I really wrestled with is, okay, you got good people in the church. And if other churches are anything like Woodmont, you've got people that are Republicans, people that are Democrats, you got people that love Donald Trump, people that despise Donald Trump, everything in between. And those are the folks that are sitting in our pews. And as ministers, we have to find a way to minister to all of them and not to marginalize any of them. And if you're familiar with the disciples movement, the Stone Campbell movement, we're a movement for wholeness in a fragmented world, and we're trying to bring everybody to the table so that there can be open and honest and respectful dialogue about the issues of the day. But the truth of the matter is, we're not always very good at doing that. And so that's one of the things that I tried to take on. And then, in true academic fashion, my advisors at Sewanee said, "Okay, this is great, but we really want you to pick a topic. Like, we want you to focus this broader kind of umbrella topic into an issue." And so they said, if you want to pick war, if you want to pick healthcare, if you want to pick abortion or the death penalty. And I said, no, I think I want to talk about money and materialism, because money is related to politics. And I think that one of the greatest challenges that ministers who pastor affluent congregations have is, how do you draw out the correlation between money, materialism, and spiritual restlessness, which I think is very prevalent in our culture. And I've been at Woodmont. I'm finishing my 9th year. This is my 9th year, and and I'm blessed here to have political diversity, age diversity. Some I say in the book, some super wealthy CEO types, and also people that are blue collar, living paycheck to paycheck. So how do I get in the pulpit every Sunday and speak a word from the Bible that will reach all of them where they are? And then, even more importantly, how do we come to the table during an election year and have dialogue over things that people have adamant disagreements over?
Yeah. Well, I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of materialism and kind of how do you define that in the book? Is that sort of all-encompassing things related to money, or?
Yeah, I think that we live in a very materialistic world. And I think that the default mechanism for judging somebody's value in life for a lot of people has become their net worth.
Mm.
And I see a really big problem with that because lots of people who struggle to pay the bills and to make ends meet, they feel woefully inadequate because they can't afford the nice house. They can't afford the nice car. They can't send their kids to certain schools. But at the same time, I don't think that the answer is to, demonize or judge wealthy people because they also have to be held to account when it comes to character. And I've always said that I'm all for people working hard and succeeding and doing well, but they don't get a pass when it comes to the character question. And I think a lot of times in our culture, people will say if you're good looking or if you're wealthy, you get a pass. If you're good looking and wealthy, you definitely get a pass. And that's not, and that just that's not right. But I do think that we turn to materialism and consumerism as a way of filling a spiritual void in our lives that only God can fill. And so what we find is we buy things, and it gives us a temporary satisfaction, but it doesn't last because it's inadequate. But as our world becomes more and more secular, then judging people by their net worth and what they have becomes more and more prevalent. And I see that as a problem.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and like you said, money is very much tied to politics. And whether it's, we're talking about taxes or, government spending or, programs, free college education, state-funded college education. It's become it's a big topic in this current political season. And it seems to be one of the big issues that generates, like you said, a lot of passion, a lot of emotion, a lot of energy for folks. Tell us a little bit more about your church and kind of how you see it in your context and maybe some other church contexts. This idea of a politically diverse church.
Sure. Yeah. So Woodmont Christian Church is located in Green Hills in Nashville. We're not far from Vanderbilt. This is a very affluent, commercialized part of this town. We have the mall just down the street. We have very expensive homes that are going up every day. And so on the one hand, a church like Woodmont is very blessed because we have financial resources to do a lot of different things in terms of our budget and our ministries and our mission and our outreach. But at the same time, I also think that what you'll find is that when people are successful and affluent, they have a lot of distractions in their lives. And so you don't see them, you might see them once a month. And they have other things that are competing for their loyalty. Friedrich Nietzsche once said that he predicted that in Western culture that money would soon replace God. And unfortunately, I feel like to some degree, for a lot of people, that's true. So at Woodmont, my challenge is how can I teach and preach in an affluent context and not make people feel, there's no reason to make them feel bad or guilty about their success, but to challenge them and to remind them that that stuff is not adequate for filling the spiritual void. That everybody still is called to grow in their faith, to grow in their spiritual life, to grow in their character development, and so is it nice to where if money's not a stressor in your life, meaning you've got enough to pay the bills and be comfortable? Sure, but what I've found is that money is actually a stress in everybody's lives, and materialism, wrestling with materialism. What do I need? What do I want? I think that's real for people in all socioeconomic levels.
Yeah.
So anyway, our context is we're blessed to be in a great part of Nashville, a historic church. It was founded in 1943. Actually, it was a church plant from Vine Street Christian Church when it was downtown. So this year we're going to celebrate our 73rd anniversary. But I think the blessing is we have resources to do a lot of our ministries, but we have to be very open and honest about the things that Jesus had to say about money and materialism.
You brought up an interesting point there, and I think this is something that churches, regardless of size, are seeing, and that's this change in frequency of attendance, right? Where people are attending church maybe once or twice a month as opposed to every week. And that, I think that's an interesting, when talking more broadly just about, preaching in general, and how do you as a pastor prepare to preach every week, knowing this might be the only time this month that I'm, that this person is going to be here. Does that put almost a different kind of pressure on you to every week know this might be the only chance this person gets to hear this message this month?
Yeah, or what if the 1 week that they show up, I'm not preaching, and they think, man, where's Clay been? And said, well, that was just the 1 week I took off, and you happen to show up. Yeah, I do think that's the norm. I think that the trend is, the research and the trends have shown that regular church attendance used to be, I would say 3 out of 4 Sundays a month. You might have a Sunday where you traveled or you're sick. Now, if people come to church once a month, they feel like they are regular churchgoers. Yeah. And for me as a pastor and a preacher, that that's not adequate for me. I still think that it's very important to honor the Sabbath and to come to church, but that has been the trend in our culture. And so I think that it speaks to a larger issue, which is, growing secularism. Charles Taylor's book, A Secular Age, was fascinating because he said that we went from being a culture where, a belief in God was absolutely necessary and essential, and just a given, to where many people now think, one, I don't know what I think about God, and some people are, openly rejecting the concept of a belief in God and saying that they're fine with that. So the challenge that America is facing as our country becomes more and more secular, I think is real. And you see this more like in the Northeast or in the Pacific Northwest. We're blessed to still be in the Bible Belt, so going to church is still a fashionable thing. It's still the thing to do. So I think the combination of materialism with secularism has made the job of ministers and faith leaders very difficult.
And what I hear you saying, which is something I haven't necessarily heard or thought about, is making that connection to materialism, that more and more people are, folks on lower end of the economic spectrum are having to work on Sundays.
Correct.
When in the past, maybe they didn't. And other folks are choosing vacations, choosing to work, choosing to do other things. So that's interesting.
If you remember the book that Stanley and Will Willimon put out years ago called Resident Aliens, one of the things that they marked the end of Christendom when blue laws disappeared, and all of a sudden Sunday was not the Sabbath anymore. It was fair game for the culture to do whatever it wants. So now you've got kids' sports leagues on Sunday morning, and you got people that that have business meetings on Sunday morning, and really it's dangerous because there is never a time to rest. There's never a time to worship. People have to make it a priority the way that it used to be 40, 50 years ago.
Right. I want to mention for folks that are watching, I'm going to have a special offer on Clay's book that I'm going to mention here in a little bit. So stay with us. You mentioned Hauswarth, and I want to come back to Hauswarth because I know as a theologian, he and his thinking plays heavily into your book. But we've got a few questions here from folks on YouTube. So let me bring in the first one here from KJ, who asked, the current two-party system is splintering beyond Republican, Democrat, red state, blue state divide. Is that reflected in further splintering in congregations?
Well, I've said I've been leading a class at Woodmont on Wednesday nights called Right Left Christian, and it was obviously tied into the book, but also just to the election cycle. And so in this particular election, you take Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, uh, Marco Rubio, and then like Ted Cruz, Donald Trump. And to me, what it appears to be is you've got kind of four different options. It's not just a two-party option. It's you've got multiple options within within these different parties. And right now, there's this battle going on for the heart and soul of the Republican Party. You got people like Mitt Romney freaking out that Donald Trump appears to possibly be becoming the nominee. You got Donald Trump in the debate last night saying, "Hey, I'm bringing millions of people into this party. If you're smart, you would just accept them." And the establishment Republicans are, saying, "No, I don't want to accept them, and I can't believe this is happening." So this election has really defied, all odds, and political scientists have been scratching their heads saying, "What is happening here?" And I do think that the two-party system is a problem, but we've never been able to really get away from it, except for the third-party candidate that comes in and then usually ruins the chances of one of the other two. So in this election, I actually see that you have more than two options. You have multiple options in each of the parties, and it will be interesting to see, who gets the nominations, if it is Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and then after that, how this plays out in the future. What happens to the establishment of both parties? There are clearly a lot of people in our country that are very frustrated and very angry. And you see that on both sides. You don't just see that with the Democrats or the Republicans. You see that across the board. And guess what? All those folks have a vote. It's the way our democracy is set up, and they're voting. And so this is a unique situation that I think is still playing out. And I'm not a political scientist, but I'm friends with political scientists, and I pay a lot of attention to it. And they're scratching their heads. John Gear is a guy here in Nashville, a political scientist at Vanderbilt, who's come to our church to speak a few times. A great guy, and he just made the comment, "I'm just sitting back and watching because this is fascinating."
Wow. Yeah. And your comment there reminded me of some of Public Religion Research Institute's data that's come out that's shown that the two political parties have become more, have moved further to the extremes. The Republican Party's become more conservative, the Democratic Party's become more liberal, and so that divide is growing and continues.
Right.
So I think what you're talking about in this book is to help pastors specifically know how to address that growing divide and how to speak to folks who are feeling polarized. Laura on YouTube asked this question, though, which I think is interesting. She says, "Is the book mostly for pastors, or does it have lessons that families could benefit from?" What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the book is. I think it's for a broad audience. I think it's for pastors. I mean, one of the goals of putting it out there is I do want both ministers and lay leaders who are looking for some type of guidance in how to have political conversations in their churches that are not, that are civil and that don't leave a lot of people angry. I hope it gives them guidance on that. But I do think that the ordinary Christian, layperson can benefit from this as well. There's a lot of footnotes in a book this size, largely because I wrote it as the result of the research I did at Sewanee. But I think that it reads well. And if you want to dive deeper into any of these subjects, then you've got a bibliography and footnotes throughout. But the answer to that question is it's for a broad audience. Yeah. I didn't want to write a book just for ministers or just for lay people or just for seminary students. I wanted it to be a book that would speak to all of those groups. And I think and I hope that it does.
Yeah. We all need that sort of biblical help in how to have these civil conversations with our family members and friends on Facebook who disagree with us.
Right.
So yeah.
Right.
Let me tell you right now, if you want to get 30% off Clay's book, you can use coupon code CLAY16, CLAY 16 at chalicepress.com. Normally, our books are 20% off every day, but you can get 30% off with Clay16. That's the coupon code. Just enter it at your at checkout and take advantage of that. It'll be available. That offer will be available until Sunday. So tell your pastor, go online, tell your friends who are arguing too much about politics on Facebook to check out this book. So yeah. I think this is the big question. Steve asks on YouTube, do you consider it appropriate for a pastor to share their own political ideologies from the pulpit or in church at all?
Yeah, I think you have to be very, very careful, and I think that there are many pastors out there that do not do it well, and I've seen it firsthand on both sides. One of the things I talk about in the introduction to the book, I sat down with a friend of mine here in Nashville who is a politician, and in fact, he's a U.S. congressman, and he basically said, "Why are you writing a book on preaching politics? I've always considered what you do to be above the fray, to be above the political fray." And I agree with that, except for the fact that ministers are stuck in the middle so many times because we are called to pastor diverse congregations. So yeah, if you're going to get up and make a partisan statement that's going to really alienate a large portion of your congregation, I don't think that's very smart. I think you have to be very careful in how you do that. And frankly, I think those conversations are much better had in small groups and around the table, because preaching is a one-way dialogue. And so if I say something on a Sunday morning that somebody doesn't agree with, then they either have to sit there and accept it or they can get up and leave. And so I don't use the pulpit to promote a certain policy or an agenda. I will use the pulpit to make people think and to challenge people. And I think that there's ways that you can do that. I think you can preface things by saying, this is a very controversial subject, but what about this? Or I've really wrestled with this in my own life. But what about this? And that's where I gained a lot of respect for Adam Hamilton. Adam is a Methodist pastor at Church of the Resurrection. In fact, the fourth chapter of the book focuses on Adam, and I think he's done a tremendous job trying to honor both sides and get people together to have dialogue. And so for me, he's been an example of a mainline pastor who acknowledges the polarization and the partisan divide within the mainline church, and has tried to address it in a very healthy way. And so I've gained a lot of respect for Adam in recent years.
Yeah. The thought that I've had in coming to this conversation is just that it seems the sort of predicament that pastors have is, if I don't speak on things, then my congregation doesn't know what I believe or where I stand on these issues that matter so much to them.
Right.
But on the other hand, like you said, if I speak out and I take a strong partisan position, it's going to alienate, it's going to offend, it's going to hurt a lot of people. And so Sharon Watkins, in her endorsement for the book, called you a voice for moderation. Which I think is great. That this idea of finding that, being careful and finding that balance of what's really appropriate and what really works and what's really helpful.
What I've found as a minister is that there's a lot of projection that goes on. Everybody wants their minister to agree with them and decide with them, right? So things like, well, of course you hate Donald Trump, right? Or, well, you would never think about voting for Bernie Sanders, right? Or, of course you feel this way on the issue of marriage. And that puts ministers in a really difficult spot because, you can't win. And so people do find comfort if they think that their minister agrees with them, because it's kind of like, feeling like you've got the president on your side in your congregation. But I've always been very intentional and clear that I want people to think for themselves, and I want them to have their own convictions. And whether or not I agree with them or not, that's not the point. The Christian church tradition has always been a tradition where we say we don't want you to check your brain at the door. We want you to think for yourself. We don't want to spoon feed you your theology and your faith. And so if you have certain convictions, then that's great. You need to be able to go in and have a dialogue about them, but nobody's asking you to change your convictions. Now, challenging your convictions can be a good thing. And I think ministers have to be very careful how they do that. But any minister that gets into the pulpit, especially in a mainline church, and takes strong, hardcore partisan positions, could find themselves without a job very quickly, or they'll find themselves with a homogenous church, which I don't think is what the mainline church is. In fact, I've said this many times. I think the mainline church over the past 30 or 40 years has alienated and marginalized a lot of conservative and moderate people. And I think it's a problem. I think it's a problem when you look at the numbers. It's a problem when you look at the financial giving. And so I think that's something that churches have to really think about, that if you alienate and marginalize a certain pocket of people, that they're not going to stick around. And that happens both ways. I'm not just saying if you take a hard left or a hard right, it happens both ways. But in the mainline church, which we all know, the mainline church has been shrinking for years. I think that's become a real issue.
But like you said, there are examples of folks like Adam Hamilton who are bucking that trend. Say more about. We talked about Stanley Hauerwas and Adam Hampton. Let's talk a little bit more about these guys and kind of what you glean from them.
Well, so Stanley Hauerwas is a theological ethicist at Duke who recently retired. I think Stanley still has an office at Duke, and he travels and speaks. He's most famous for his stance on pacifism. That's kind of where Stanley made his name. And years ago, Time Magazine named him the most influential theologian in America, which he didn't really know how to take that. But he's somebody that I don't agree with everything he says, and I talk about that in the book. But I have the utmost respect for him because he does take firm positions. Stanley believes that Jesus was a pacifist, and he was greatly influenced by guys like John Howard Yoder, who taught at Notre Dame. And so Stanley will receive a lot of criticism when he's not willing to say we got to step up and deal with ISIS. He takes a lot of criticism from people, but he believes that if you're a Christian, you should be a pacifist, and Jesus would rather die or be killed than go and kill somebody else. Pacifism is a position that I have great respect for. Personally, I've never been able to totally get there because I look at situations like ISIS and other things, and I just don't know. I feel like that is really a hard place for Christians to be. But Stanley's an academic. He's well published. I mean, he's got so many books out there. His book, The Peaceable Kingdom, that came out back in I think 1983, has been used as a primer for Christian ethics in seminaries and all over the place. But he talks a lot about issues of possessions and how possessions become possessive, and he talks about issues of joy and restlessness and fear and the role that all those things play in our lives. And so it really resonates. Adam Hamilton started the Church of the Resurrection, I think, in 2000 at a funeral home. That's how they got their name. And then now he's grown it into the largest United Methodist Church in the country. And if you remember, Sharon gave the sermon at President Obama's first inauguration, and then Adam Hamilton did at the second one. And so I actually have a good portion of that sermon that Adam preached in the book because I thought it was a great sermon. But Adam is an example of somebody who says, we have separation of church and state, but that doesn't mean that we separate faith from politics. That our faith does inform our politics, and our faith does inform, the people we support and how we feel about certain issues. And that's just realistic, and we have to be able to talk about that and acknowledge that. So both of those guys, one's an academic and one's a pastor. And I've always said about academics, Hauerwas can say the most crazy off the wall thing, and he's got tenure at Duke and he doesn't care, right? I mean, you can like him or not like him. Hamilton has to walk the pastoral balance, which many of us have to walk, where we're responsible for the things that we say. and we have to balance being a prophetic preaching voice with being a pastor, and that can be a tough balance to find, and some people do it well and others don't.
Yeah, yeah. Here's a question, and I'm curious to see what you think about this. Do you feel like some Christians, maybe many Christians, political views are more influenced by materialism than by their faith?
Would you reframe that question to, do you mean income, or do you mean materialism?
I'm thinking about
let's talk about Donald Trump.
Okay, let's talk about
Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So Donald Trump is the phenomenon right now. People don't understand how he's doing as well as he's doing. Donald Trump is a reality TV star. He is very wealthy, and he'll tell you that. Here's what he say: I'm worth $10 billion, unapologetic. But what's interesting about Donald Trump, and I get sent articles all the time, is the blue collar workers and lower middle class people. His wealth does not bother them, because he is speaking their language. Donald Trump is tapping into something, regardless of how you feel about him. If you hate him, despise him, there's plenty of things that we could pick up, things that he said, things that he's done. But he has tapped into a nerve in our country that many thought would not last. And here we are, past Super Tuesday, getting to the middle of March, and he's still ahead as the Republican frontrunner. So here's a guy that you could say is incredibly materialistic and unapologetic about it, but he is not only drawing this wide range of support, he's drawing the evangelical vote in many circles, which is fascinating. And so I've always said, it's kind of like people want to criticize Joel Osteen, gospel light, the prosperity gospel. And I've always said, okay, if you're going to criticize Joel Osteen, you need to at least be able to acknowledge what Joel Osteen does well, which is he provides a message of hope. He gives people something to hold on to. He says, if you believe that your life can be better than it is now, then it can be. So it might not be a complete version of the gospel, and you can criticize Joel Osteen as never talking about suffering. I've always said, what does a Good Friday service look like at Joel Osteen's church? I don't think they have one, right? But there's a lot of things that Joel Osteen does well, and in terms of Donald Trump, there's a lot of things that he's saying that's resonating with the American public. So we can criticize him. There's a lot of people that do, but you also have to acknowledge that he's tapped into something significant.
Well, and would you agree that perhaps the thing that they're both tapping into, Joel Osteen and Donald Trump, is this aspirational message? I think there was an op-ed in the Washington Post that sort of compared Trump to these megachurch televangelist type figures. And I guess that goes back to my original question, was sort of like the lower income folks who are supporting Trump because they have that narrative of the American dream is pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, and someday I'm going to be able to succeed and be wealthy like Donald Trump.
Right.
Is that biblical though?
Yeah. One of the things that, so the second chapter of the book is called Jesus's economic and political agenda. And the one thing that we cannot dismiss is that Jesus talked about money and Jesus talked about things. And of the roughly 40 parables that we have in the Gospels, over 20 of them, I believe, or about half of them, deal with money and stuff. And so he addressed it, and I don't think that it's a coincidence that Christianity seems to be booming in third world countries, where people have little or nothing, and yet in North America and more affluent societies, it seems to be stagnating. I don't think that it's dying. I just think that in countries like we have groups. I went to Guatemala about a year and a half ago. We send groups to Swaziland, Africa, and in countries where people have little or nothing, where they live in mud huts and their families are all they have, faith is absolutely essential. It is so important to them because it's all that they have. But in more affluent countries, you got faith in God competing with all of our stuff. And an interesting question is, what is the American dream? What is the American dream? Some people, I think I've heard in the book I mentioned, or maybe it was a sermon, that somebody summed it up by just one word. It's more. We just want more. John Rockefeller Jr. was once asked, how much is enough? And his answer was just a little bit more. And so I do think it's the part of our role as preachers and pastors is to say, hey, gratitude is really important. And being satisfied with where you are doesn't mean you quit working hard, but being satisfied with where you are and giving thanks to God for the blessings that you now have is really important. Really important. In a society that constantly bombards us with, we need more, we need bigger, we need newer. Jesus has a message for what it means to be content and to be thankful. And again, it doesn't mean that you stop working hard. It doesn't mean that you stop working to provide for your family, but you don't spend your life always just wanting more and saying, well, I'll finally be happy when I get to whatever point.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm guessing that with a book like this, you were taking on a pretty tough task, like we've talked about already. There's probably folks who wish you wouldn't be talking about it at all, and then other folks who wish you had taken a stronger stand on something. What's the response to the book been like so far? We were talking a little bit earlier about a book event that you had.
I actually had a book event here in Nashville Tuesday night. It's some friend's house, and our governor, Bill Haslam, he actually came. He came to the event. He endorsed the book, and he's our governor, Republican governor in his second term. He's a friend of mine. I know him. I have a lot of respect for Bill Haslam. People obviously get nervous when their preacher starts talking about politics, because they're like, "You're our preacher. We want you to. Politics is out there. You're supposed to be our preacher." But the problem that, as I see it, is that politics puts people in this place where kind of ruthless, uncivil dialogue is taking place, which frankly is really unchristian. And so I think that this topic of civility is really important, and that's what I talked to Governor Haslam about that. I said, why this lack of civility in public discourse? And he had a couple really interesting things to say. One of the things is, he said, I don't want to be another politician that blames the media, but the media can be a really big problem. The media loves Donald Trump. They love him.
Absolutely.
They love Bernie Sanders, because people will tune in to watch these debates that are kind of like gladiator events. And so, the media is a problem, and the media likes the warfare, whether they'd ever admit to it or not. They like it when people go after each other. Mm-hmm. The other thing that Governor Haslam said that I thought was fascinating, because he is a Christian, he's a Presbyterian. He said, I would rather have God use me for God's purposes than use God for my own purposes. And one of the fascinating things that happens in any election cycle is you get into this debate about who's the best Christian and who's the most Christian candidate and who should the Christians vote for. And the irony is, which version of Christianity are you talking about? There's a lot of different versions of Christianity out there. And so you get candidates, both sides of the aisle. I would say maybe the Republicans can specialize in it a little bit, but who is the real Christian candidate? Who should the evangelicals follow? And in this election, you see the evangelicals, however you define that, going for lots of different candidates. You also see mainline churchgoers going for different candidates. You see a lot of people that are so depressed about their options, they don't know what they're going to do. They say, I might stay home, or I might write in Steve Knight. I mean, they don't know what they're going to do. So it's a fascinating year, and it's going to continue to be a fascinating year. But the event, I appreciated being able to have that dialogue with Governor Haslam, because here's somebody who's in the thick of it. He's well respected in Tennessee. I would call him a moderate Republican. I mean, he's trying to get things done, and he takes a lot of criticism. And he gets to see firsthand just how unruly and disrespectful the dialogue can be.
Wow. You have another big book event coming up in Nashville. For folks who are watching, who are in the area, tell us about this. The book event at Parnassus Books.
Yeah, Parnassus is a local bookstore just down the road here, and it's a place that I frequent, and it's owned by some friends, but also it's just the place where a lot of our members go to buy books, because you guys have noticed bookstores have been disappearing. And so don't let that discourage you from buying the ebook if you want to buy the ebook. But bookstores have been disappearing, and Parnassus has been an example of a place in Nashville where we've been able to continue to serve the community, and they'll bring in authors. So on March the 31st, which is the Thursday night after Easter, at 6 o'clock, I'm gonna speak at Parnassus and have a book signing and make that available to the Nashville community, Woodmont members, but also to folks in the community. And that's a great bookstore, and we'll be honored to be there and to talk. And like I said, that's the place that I go to when I'm looking to buy books. And it should be a good night. So invite anybody who'd like to come, and they do a great job with those events.
That's awesome. I'm going to be there. I'm driving out from Charlotte, North Carolina to be there for the Nashville event on the 31st. And I'm glad you mentioned the book is available on Kindle. It's available on EPUB, ePDF. If you order through chalicepress.com and you use the coupon code CLAY16 between now and this Sunday, you've got about 48 hours. Take advantage of it. 30% off with the coupon code CLAY16. I've got one last question here from the YouTube viewers. Gary asks, before we wrap up here, and I'll give you one chance to, any closing comments, Clay. But Gary asks, what do you think pastors think about the Constitution? Is it Christian?
Clearly, if you read John Meacham's book, The American Gospel, clearly faith played a very important role in the lives of our founding fathers. But they were also very intentional in trying to set up the republic to where there was a separation of church and state because of what they had come from and seen. So in terms of the Constitution, you do find some language in there endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights that that is faith-based language, right? And lots of people will ask, well, isn't this a Christian nation? Well, this is a nation that has a lot of Christians in leadership, but this is also a nation that has a Jewish population and a Muslim population and a Hindu population, and so. I would say that the goal is to maintain a separation of church and state, but to never keep faith, whatever the faith is, from influencing our leaders and their policies, because you can't. If your faith is important to you, it's going to impact what you believe and how you feel. So there was the question: what is the Constitution a Christian document? Is that the question?
That was the second part of it. The first part was, what do you think other pastors think about the Constitution? Which I think is kind of
it'd be interesting to know how many pastors have read the Constitution in the past 10 years. Just in general, I think it's a beautiful document, and and it was genius in a lot of ways because it sustained our nation throughout its history. I don't know. I guess I'd have to ask the other pastors what they think about the Constitution, and does it, are they familiar with it, and do they bring it up? But it certainly is. It's an important document that, by the way, is being talked about a lot in this presidential election, with the Supreme Court vacancy and just the general debate. So I do think that there is some faith-based language in the Constitution that you cannot ignore. But I think our founders wanted to maintain the separation of church and state so that there would never be imposition from the state or the church and state controlling the society, controlling the culture.
Hey, Clay, I've got a great idea. What do you think about this? People order your book, they email us their receipt, and then you will email them back and tell them who you're voting for in the primary.
Oh man, not falling for that. It is a great idea. But yeah, that I don't know. That's probably not the best idea.
I'll let you off the hook. I'll let you off the hook.
Appreciate that.
All right. All right. It's been so great. Thank you, Clay, for this hour. Thank you, everyone who's been watching on YouTube. This video will be archived on the Chalice Press YouTube channel. Go back and watch it again. Share the link. Pass it along to your pastor. Next 48 hours, get 30% off Clay's book, Preaching Politics, at chalicepress.com with that coupon code CLAY16. And we've got another live stream conversation coming up with Kendra Well Irons and Melanie Springer Mock, the authors of If Eve Only Knew. Look for that info on the Chalice Press Facebook page. Join us again in a couple weeks for that live stream. That'll be another great conversation. And Clay, any closing thoughts, comments?
Yeah, well, thanks for doing this. It's been an honor to sit here and talk. I hope it's been helpful and insightful. You know, the book is about three topics that everybody thinks about on a regular basis, and so religion, politics, and then money. So for pastors and church members, lay leaders, I think it's a great resource, not only for how to have the political conversations, but also how do you approach stewardship. Stewardship matters if we want to see the future of the church continue. And so I think it's a stewardship resource as well. You know, there are Christians, good people, who fall into all political parties and who fall into, you know, all different sides of hot issues, things like same-sex marriage, things like abortion, war, the death penalty. And I think that's the reality. We've done a poor job, at least in my opinion, of letting people come to the table and have civil conversations over issues where they disagree. And so what really drew me into this was, how can we make the dialogue more respectful? Let's not assume that people are going to agree. Let's not assume that we're going to get everybody onto one position, but let's assume that at the heart of the Christian church is this idea that we welcome all to the table. We welcome all to the table, and we care what they believe, and your position, whatever it is, or your politics or your stance, should only be sharpened and enhanced by having conversations with other people who either disagree with you or have a different perspective. And so I'm really, you know, what I'm after is civility. I'm also after a lot of what Jonathan Haidt's after, and that is learning to understand liberals and conservatives better and where they're coming from, and to realize that, you know, Republicans aren't a bunch of rich jerks that just don't care about anybody, and Democrats aren't just a bunch of people that want to seek the country because they're into a bunch of free stuff. I mean, you know, these stereotypes get thrown all over the place, and it creates this tension and this fear in our culture that really is unhealthy. And so I think that if we can't come into the local church and have civil, respectful dialogue with people whom we disagree, then where can we do it? And if we can't do that, then we're simply becoming a reflection of society, and I see that as being a problem. So I think these topics are important, and you know, I wrote the book, so I believe in the book, but I really hope it'll help people wrestle with these things, and in light of their faith, and in light of the age in which we live.
Wow, that'll preach. You should be a preacher, Clay. That was good.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate that.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Clay, and thanks for everybody out there for watching. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks to Chalice Press. Appreciate it.
Thanks.